Barts in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and whether you are joining us here in person on Park Avenue or online at stbarts.org, it is my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum, where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And before I turn it to our guests of honor, not really guests, but our featured people of honor, I want to acknowledge that it is my first Sunday back with you all. I'm very glad to be here, and I want to thank those who worked so hard, both volunteers and staff, to fill in the gaps while I was gone, and particularly here at the forum, I want to thank my colleague, the Reverend Meredith Ward, for shepherding the forum for 3 months. It was, I've seen a few of them. I look forward to catching up with the others, and I'm so grateful to Meredith for taking this all on. So we now turn to the subject of the day, which is our own fearless leader and rector, Bishop Dean Wolfe. This week he is celebrating 30 years of ministry as a priest, 31 years of ministry total in the Episcopal Church, and 20 years as a bishop. I think you all know that on Wednesday we're going to be having a big celebration with lots of bishops in the house of Dean and his ministry. And we're so glad that Dean has agreed to talk and reflect a little bit on that ministry this morning. And we're so glad to also have Ellen, his wife, with us to reflect on all these years from her perspective as well. Thank you to you both.
Well, thank you. It's really it's a joy to work in in an environment where your colleagues say, we should have a party. And so I'm really delighted to celebrate with you all. Really in my ministry, there hasn't been a period of time quite like this. I think we celebrated 10 years in the Diocese of Kansas, but a little more briefly. And so this is fun.
Dean, are you on? Can everyone hear him? Okay.
It sounds like something just happened to turn up the volume.
Perfect.
Here. So,
great.
So I'm definitely on. It's that great story about the bishop who comes up to the altar and says, there's something wrong with this microphone, and the congregation responds, and also with you. Well, I began ministry, and I'll talk for a little bit and then turn it over to Ellen here. I began Ellen and I were both members of the Church of the Brethren, and when I was in college, I was doing concrete testing one summer, which is a job that you really don't want to do. And I got a call from the district executive, who's kind of like our bishop, who said, hey, there's a church in Circleville, Ohio, and I was wondering if you would take it for the summer. And I was thrilled, and so at 21, with no seminary, I was given a congregation, which in those days, a very small congregation, but it was about 80 people, and they all came every Sunday morning and every Sunday night and every Wednesday night. And the services were broadcast on WNRE to most of Pickaway County. And so they would just broadcast the service, and then wherever you were, when it was time for the farm report, they said, and you've been listening to Brother Dean Wolfe, and they'd go to the farm report. So I did a number of ministries like that in the Church of the Brethren in bigger and bigger congregations, and that was a great experience for me. I felt like I'd encountered the Episcopal Church in college, and theologically and liturgically, I felt that kind of more fit me, but these folks were giving me an opportunity to test out ministry, and I loved it. When Ellen and I were married, we started to attend an Episcopal church first in Chicago and then in Dayton, Ohio. And I started thinking about being a candidate for holy orders then, but it was a long process, and I was promoted to the West Coast, and so we kind of got a new start out there, and that's where we were both confirmed in the Episcopal Church by Bill Swing, who was here this past summer. And I served on the vestry and then as senior warden. I found out if you fill out a pledge card in an Episcopal church, they see you coming. They were very interested in having us be involved. So Ellen and I then went to Virginia Theological Seminary. I did 3 years there and a year residence at the Washington Hospital Center in clinical counseling training, and then served at Christ Church Alexandria as a seminarian, a historic colonial church where I worked with Mark Anschutz, who became such a great mentor to me. After ordination, we moved to St. Clement's in Berkeley, California. Ellen was pregnant, and we had our first child and only child. Our best and worst son was born in Berkeley. He's very proud of that. It seems much cooler than other places. So, from there, we went to Trinity Copley Square in Boston, where I was kind of a senior associate rector. St. Michael and All Angels in Dallas, Texas, which was the largest congregation in the Episcopal Church at the time. Some 6,000 members and some 12, 13 liturgies between Saturday night and Sunday night. Great experience, kind of overseeing 40 people on staff out of the 60 people who were there. And then I became Bishop of Kansas. I'd never been the rector of a parish when I became Bishop of Kansas, but like Rowan Williams and Catherine Jefferts Shorey, I thought I was in good company. So as Bishop of Kansas, I was ordained right in the midst of the controversies around Gene Robinson, an openly gay bishop, being confirmed for leadership in the church. We went through the Great Depression of 2008, or the Great Recession, I think we call it. And we were right in the beginning a capital campaign for a new diocesan center, which we eventually completed. We built the Bishop Kemper School for Ministry, a training program for people who can't be a resident in a 3-year accredited seminary. And then the Kansas to Kenya program, a ministry to the Diocese of Nakuru in Kenya, and then created an Alleluia Grants program. I was the vice president of the House of Bishops for the last 8 years that I served as Bishop of Kansas, and represented the Episcopal Church in conversations with the Archbishop of Canterbury. I wrote negotiations, but I thought that was a little stiff there. And then represented the Episcopal Church in the World Council of Churches, which brought me to St. Bart's. I thought I had one more kind of great project left, and I could have stayed in Kansas, but I felt like I was starting to get a little stale in that position and wanted to give somebody else the opportunity to serve, and came here and found probably the most challenging and demanding ministry of my life here. Ellen?
How to follow that. I think I'll start further back than Dean did. Our parents went to the same Church of the Brethren when we were born, the year we were born. So our names are side by side on a cradle roll at the Mac Memorial Church of the Brethren in Dayton, Ohio. Dean's family didn't attend much when we were kids, so I don't really remember him much at all. Except one 6th grade Sunday school class, I was the painfully shy child who thought she knew the answers but would never raise her hand, and Dean was the kid going. So I did immediately notice him then. So. But they did start an active youth group when we were in high school. So we grew up kind of in the same youth group. And he and my brother and 3 other young men were licensed to the ministry at the age of 16, which is an unusual thing in the Church of the Brethren, but it gives young people an opportunity to investigate and explore whether or not that might be a calling to ordained ministry. So from the early moments on, and we dated off and on for almost 10 years before we were married at the age of 24. But for all of that time, it was pretty clear to me that eventually Dean was going to end up in ordained ministry, that was what he wanted to do. And from my perspective, a part of the blessing of that has been watching him be able to fulfill that. The other part of the blessing for me, and one of the questions I get asked most often as a clergy spouse is, have you ever felt pressured to do things you would rather not do? Fortunately, I don't play the organ. I've never been asked to do that. Never been asked to. I have taught Sunday school, but what has been the blessing in all of it is I have always felt honored to be able to choose whatever part of ministry I felt called to do and to honor my gifts and what I thought my talents were. And in pretty much every call where Dean has served, that has been the case. And that is a true blessing because not all clergy spouses feel that kind of freedom. It just kind of depends. The role has certainly changed and evolved many, many different ways in the last 30 years. You know, even in the Church of the Brethren, you're not expected to play the organ as a clergy spouse anymore. So,
but you do need to lead Sunday school classes.
Yes. True. But I have often felt that one of the things that I enjoy the most and is sort of a gift of mine is the gift of hospitality or entertaining, and that has gone hand in hand with what Dean's ministries have been, and so that's been a fun thing to be involved with. I've chaired a lot of different events, 2 or 3 big women's summits in the Diocese of Kansas, a couple of social events there. Flora and I co-chaired the Fair Share Friday here. I've been involved in a lot of church activities, which I think would have been the case regardless of being married to a clergy person or not, but I have always felt a real blessing to be able to choose those things. I've had my own career at various points, very varied career as an interior designer, a banker, and a healthcare representative for Pfizer, otherwise known as a drug rep, evil people. But, but it was interesting, very interesting. And I just feel as though serving in ministry alongside Dean has been truly an honor and a blessing for me.
So the third member of your family is not present today, but I think will be on Wednesday, right?
Correct.
If William were here, how would he add to the conversation?
Wow. Well, you know, you've heard me, I say this to all the associates, that I have very few regrets in ministry, but one of them, at different points, I felt like I was a little too all in, and Ellen picked up more of the parenting, and I was less available to him. I think I thought that he would just live at home forever, and I would have chance to make up that. But when he left for college, he really left and started doing summers in Oxford and then moved to Washington and then moved back to Dallas and married a Dallas girl. And so I kind of feel like I missed him some along the way. I think he would say that the church is important to him. He was involved in a choral program at Grace Cathedral in Topeka, and that was a very important part of his spirituality. I don't know. I think it's weird, as a friend of mine says, to be the son of a bish. So I think he's enjoyed it, but his tolerance for coffee hour is minimal. You know, when I was first elected bishop in Kansas, I thought we'd be like, the adventurous family. We'd all pile into the car and go on these different visitations. And of course, people only had like 2 questions for him, like, how old are you and how do you like Kansas? And so after a while, we realized he needed to have his own commitment, and Ellen and William would go to the cathedral while I made my travels.
Question for both of you. What do you know now after these 31 years that you didn't know at the beginning?
My first initial response to that is the church is a wonderful place, full of the most amazing people. We had, and that's true. I mean, I will go back as far as our Church of the Brethren roots, with churches that Dean served in the Brethren Church, with all the churches he served as a priest, all the multiple churches he visited in Kansas. The wider church, as we've been privileged to travel around the country and even the world and see various parts of the Anglican Communion and the Episcopal Church, there is amazing vitality within the church. And I know we all talk a lot right now about the declining membership and declining attendance and all of those things, but it is very much alive in the world, and it's been such a privilege to see all the different ways that manifests itself in tiny little communities in rural Kansas and New York City and everywhere in between.
Yeah, when I was on the faculty for the College for Bishops and we were talking to new bishops about that role, we would all kind of give little tips. One of mine was, your car is more important than your office because you spend more time in it as a bishop. But I have a couple of things that I think I've learned. One is the way you go about doing things is actually more important than what you do. In the church, process matters. And if you get the right answer but go about it in the wrong way, you have to go back and redo it usually. Passion counts. I've been fortunate to be surrounded by people who had the same kind of intensity that I have about their faith and ministry, and that's a really important thing. You've heard me say this, but the book I want to write is Dysfunction is Always Working for Someone. One of the objectives for any leader in any organization, but particularly in the church, is to make sure that dysfunctional behavior doesn't work, is not rewarded. So we try to unhook that. I think that something I learned later is how important the happy village is in terms of the staff. You can spend a lot of time trying to make unhappy people happy, and that usually doesn't work. And so kind of insisting that people who are a part of the team are experiencing some contentment and joy. And then excellence attracts excellence. When you get really good people on your team, other really good people want to be a part of it. And that's actually, at this point in my ministry, the most fun thing is watching the development of the associates and watch them continue to grow and get better. We got a hard-working team that it's just kind of fun to come to work and be with them. So.
How has your faith in God changed, if at all, over these last 3 decades?
I was going to do something funny and say, God, who believes in God? No, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I mean, over time, the harder the work gets, the more you lean into your faith. And so the more demanding my positions have become, the more I had to depend on God, and the less I could depend upon my own skills and gifts. You need to have skills, you need to have gifts, you need to have a good work ethic, and I think that my faith has been deeply enriched by doing this work and being forced to your knees in prayer.
I think I would have to say something fairly similar to that, in the sense that, and maybe this is true for most of us as we age, but the older you are and the more experiences you have, even the terrible things that happen seem to have a purpose for being. And so my understanding of how God works in our lives, or my theology of that, has just been strengthened over the years. We've had, like everyone, our share of ups and downs and plenty of things, a lot of sadness and wonderful joys. But even through the harder times, there have always been interesting learnings, sometimes silver linings we didn't foresee, I didn't foresee. And so I think I would definitely say my faith has grown and strengthened, and I think that's probably true for most people. I've definitely felt tested at various points, and a part of that, I think, is being more dependent. My dependence on prayer is much greater than it was when I was, 26 years old. It just has grown.
What has ministry as a bishop, how has that been different from ministry as a priest?
When I was elected bishop, there were people who were concerned, and they said he's really too young to be a bishop. And the chair of the search committee said, well, that may be true, but time will take care of that. And it did. The role of bishop is an interesting one, and I think it has a lot to do with pastoral care for clergy, particularly in a pastorally sized diocese. When I went to Kansas, I think we had around 70 churches. We closed several and merged a couple. But, it was... it's just the difficulty, I think, in pastoral care as a bishop is because you also are the boss. And so some pastoral care has to be deferred because you have to implement the disciplinary practices, which I think most bishops would say that's their least favorite part of the episcopacy. And increasingly, bishops are responsible for managing effectively the decline in terms of resources and numbers of people, numbers of young people. That's hard work to do. You can start some things, but finding ways to close others is an important part of that work. Every now and then, I'll find a bishop who's made a promise when they come in that they won't close any churches. Well, that means that the person that follows you will have to close a number. That's sad in some ways, but there are resurrection stories that abound in churches that merge and close and pop up in different ways.
Anything, Ellen, about being a bishop's spouse as opposed to a priest's spouse?
Again, it's a little different role. One of the things that Dean and I served as faculty for the New Bishops and Spouses Conference every year for 7 years, which is a gathering of the most recently elected bishops and their spouses. And one of the things that we talked about as spouses in that group is the loss of a parish community. When your spouse moves into the role of bishop, don't necessarily have a church community. As Dean said, he had this grand vision that the three of us would travel the diocese every weekend, and that turned out not to be true. So our son and I did find a parish community in the cathedral. But then when William left for college, I did start traveling with Dean, and it is a loss to not have a parish community. There, you have a wider, bigger community, but you're not geographically close to them. You're just not as close to them because you're not seeing them like you do a parish community. So coming to St. Bart's was like a gift to be back in a parish where there's a community that I see the same faces every Sunday, and I get to know people, and we're at events together outside of the church. That's such a gift. You all know this because you're part of this community. It's just an important thing that strangely is a little bit different when a spouse is serving as a bishop's spouse.
One of the surprises, I think, in being bishop, you lose your ability to be closer to other priests in your diocese, but the community that you connect to is the House of Bishops, and I never imagined that would be the most collegial experience that I'd have in my entire ministry. As somebody said, anyone who's here, there's nowhere else to go. You know, they're not working to kind of climb some sort of ladder, and there was a lot of intimacy and great sharing when the House of Bishops met, and the spouses of bishops had a close community as well. So I think that was surprising and a really wonderful discovery.
Dean, a lot of people may not be as aware of your role as the kind of number two person within the House of Bishops and the ways in which that made you a kind of diplomat for the church. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I know you're trying to imagine me as a diplomat, but you know, go with me a little bit here. You know, the presiding bishop, it's a really, when Catherine Jefferts Shorey called me to ask if I would serve as vice president of the House, I said, Catherine, I promised you that when you were elected, that if there was anything you needed of me, that I would endeavor to offer it. So the answer is yes. I hung up the phone, and then I called her back and I said, Catherine, why did you ask me to do this, and what does the vice president do? And her answer was, she said, I think that you have a broad group of relationships across the House of Bishops. You talk to conservatives and liberals, and I think that's important. And secondly, the primary reason for having a vice president is something happens to the presiding bishop. And that didn't happen in her tenure, but it did happen early in Michael's tenure, where I actually, for a period of time, served as the presiding bishop. There was one moment in the House of Bishops at General Convention where Catherine, as the chair of the House, wanted to speak to an issue. So she had to excuse herself from the chair. Then I became the chair, and she went down to the floor. And when she addressed the chair, she said, "Presiding Bishop." And I went, "Oh man, wow, we're in way deep water here." But you know, working with Catherine Jefferts Shorey, who is a brilliant, amazingly faithful, resilient, what we sometimes called a wartime presiding bishop, was such a privilege, joy. And then working with Michael early on, I felt like I needed to give that position up when I became rector here. Thought the vice president should be a bishop with jurisdiction. And I also couldn't do the workload here and there, but I loved it. And it was also hard. I had this, I'm kind of an Anglophile. I mean, I love all things English, and, you know, I thought that the Archbishop of Canterbury and I were going to be like, you know, buds, And I realized that as I was representing the Episcopal Church to the Archbishop of Canterbury, that we were not going to be buds in that way. We were going to be brothers in Christ, negotiating really difficult issues. And so that opened my eyes to the reality of the Anglican Communion and the tensions that exist there. And the difference, I always think that, the English they're like us exactly, except they have an accent. And then you realize how different English culture is. And that was hard and educational. I don't know. Trying to say, what can I say here at this point? Now, a lot of those things have sort of resolved over time. We've sort of agreed to disagree, but there are still powerful tensions in the Anglican Communion, and the churches in Nigeria and Kenya and Uganda are always, right at the edge of leaving the Anglican Communion over theological issues.
I'm sure you all have plenty of questions for Dean and Ellen, and we have plenty of time for questions. If you have questions and you're here in the room, Kate DiTullio has question cards that she's going to bring around. Just raise your hand, and then she'll collect them and bring them forward. If you're joining us online, you can type your question into the chat function on YouTube, the comments function on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. And if you're in the room, email works as well. While we're waiting for the questions, I wonder, Dean, you're now almost at 7 years as rector of St. Bart's. I wonder if the two of you can look back a little on your ministry so far in this place, a ministry you probably did not anticipate a global pandemic when you started here, as well as probably many other things. What have the last 7 years been like for the two of you?
You want to start, or you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. I think that of course nobody envisioned a global pandemic, and one of the miracle stories I like to tell is that we received an anonymous gift for $30,000 to buy camera equipment in December before the pandemic, and so we placed the order. I think it may have come in January or early February. We started installing it, and Kara, by staying here, sleeping at the church 48 hours straight, basically, and Greg Harper got it lined up so that the very first Sunday that we were not able to be in church, we had a ministry platform that we could send out and stream our services. That's a God thing. I would have been standing there with my iPhone. I mean, we had no real plan B on that, and could not have imagined. It always seemed like a nice thing to have, but it didn't seem like an essential thing to have. I was also blessed, and I see Jamie here. We had a group of physicians that advised me in the pandemic, and well, this is going out to the world, so I guess I can't even whisper it. But I felt I had better counsel as the rector of St. Bart's than a lot of other leaders in the church, and felt very grateful for that. And so, being here, all of you know, New York City was the epicenter. It was really hard, and it was scary. And, clergy, had to determine, what kind of level of risk that they could take on. We divided the teams, so if one person went down, not everybody would be sick, and the second team could carry on. It was an amazing period of ministry. And maybe out of the out of the adversity came some of our finest moments, honestly. The way in which the associates responded by putting things online, the educational offerings were never richer. And now we benefit from an online congregation that even if we haven't reached always our pre-COVID levels of attendance, if you count the people who are watching online, we're almost always having more people participating in worship than we had before the pandemic. Very few churches can say that, I think. So what was the question?
The last 7 years.
Last 7 years. Well, the pandemic, took up 2 to 3 of them in a significant way. Getting the right team here was challenging, and I feel like we have that. It's important that the people who come here, particularly clergy, are all in. I now describe this to people like, going to a very competitive financial house or a hospital or medical center that has an elite program. If you come to St. Bart's, you've got to be willing to really hit it pretty hard. And if you think that this is going to be a place that you can kind of have a normal kind of 9 to 5 sort of schedule, that doesn't really work. And I think the team that we have understands that. We also need to not kill the team too, and find ways to pace and make sure that they get sabbatical time and vacations and days off. I hope we're getting better at that. Sometimes I'm not sure, but but I think our aspiration is to do that, and we're all on board with that. The financial pressures at St. Bart's are enormous, and the rector and the vestry feel them all the time. If you're tired of hearing us talk about pledging and stewardship, please understand where that comes from. First of all, we want people to experience the joy of deeply giving to the church. It really is a joy, and once you get used to it, it blesses you in ways that are difficult to describe. So I have no apologies about asking. I'm not asking for people to participate hat in hand. But the viability of this parish over the next 10, 20, 50 years, the sale of air rights has been crucial to us. We've done $20 million of renovation to this building since just before I came and during the time that I've been here. Some of that was the campaign that you ran for the restoration of the dome. Some of that had to do with selling air rights, but that's more work than has been done on this church since it was built. That's a huge thing, and it's still not enough. There's still things you can look around and see all the things that are not quite repaired at the level they should be. Figuring out that, cultivating large gifts, cultivating gifts from granting agencies, that's an important part of what we're doing. And bringing Jema on as a stewardship and development director has been a part of our commitment to fix this part of the program.
Ellen, any highlights from the last 7 years?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's just been such a joy to be able to plug into various things that I chose and was interested in. And like everyone, I kind of have the pre-COVID years, COVID years, and post-COVID years. But early on, I was involved. I volunteered at the pantry and was involved with the Fair Share Friday a couple of years, and really enjoyed that very much. And for those of you who have maybe had very little affiliation or connection to Crossroads, go down there sometime when they're working in the week. It's an amazing place, just interesting things happening, and really, really fine work being done by a lot of really fine people. Good relationships established, so I highly commend that.
2,500 meals a week was a lot. That's a lot. 5,000 meals a week is a lot more. And that's what they're doing week after week. The line, you see it, goes around the church. Our neighbors are nervous. It's always been an important ministry, but now more important than ever with all of the immigrant population coming into New York.
Mm-hmm. I also was connected to a very small group before COVID that went up to Harlem and tutored, which was a fancy word for read with first graders, which was so much fun early in my time here, and I really enjoyed that. And one of the things that taught me is there are an amazing number of small groups in this parish doing interesting things, and so really look around to find the places that you want to connect, because chances are good that somewhere in this church, if there's something you're interested in, there's already a group doing it. Or if not, start one. There's probably other people interested in doing it. So that has been a really fun learning for me over the last 7 years.
When you look back over the last 3 decades, are there particularly rewarding high points that you remember?
Well, I would say I was just invited back to the Diocese of Kansas. We were trying to do this earlier, but COVID hit and it was delayed. They unveiled a portrait, which I've got to say is a surreal experience. But when I left, I think there were people in Kansas. I'd been there 14 years. That's a long tenure for a bishop, really. But I think some people thought, oh, well, he's kind of left us, and he's gone to the big city, and he wants to be with those fancy folks. And what did he really what did he do here? But at that point, we hadn't yet built the diocesan center and the classrooms for the Bishop Kemper School for Ministry. People hadn't really seen the effect of that. So when I went back, I was honored primarily for the work that the leadership that I and others were a part of with that. And it was really rewarding, because at the time, I knew people didn't know what we were doing. Why are we creating a seminary? There are 14 seminaries around the country. They're all in trouble. But I couldn't get anyone at any of our traditional seminaries to create a program for training clergy in Kansas that involved primarily weekends and online learning. We knew we needed to do a lot of it in person, but we knew we needed to do some of it online. The Bishop Kemper School now is serving 6 dioceses. And has graduated more than 100 people who are serving churches. And the deal is, if you're a professional person, maybe you're a school teacher or a doctor or a business person, if you would give 10 weekends a year for 3 years, we would have you, in the old language was read for orders, we would have you equipped to serve a small church. And a lot of the churches in Kansas and in the Diocese of New York are part-time positions. So you can't go for 3 years and leave your family and your work and immerse in that if you're going to serve a part-time church, because the salary won't be there. You won't ever even get the seminary debt paid off. So one of the most satisfying things was going back and seeing how well that had done, because we really had no idea how successful that would be. And Larry Bingham, who was a lay leader, who was the chair of the capital campaign that helped get the money that made that possible, he and I thought it was important. We didn't know it would work. And taking that chance was really important. And you know, I mean, there are lots of little moments. You know, it's, you know, a privilege, even when you're not always agreeing, to be invited to Lambeth Palace and to, you know, spend the night and have breakfast with the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's a privilege. The leaders that I have met from all over the world representing the Episcopal Church. I'd say that the most satisfying work has not been at the wider church level, but has been at the parish level. And there was a reason that I came to St. Bart's. I had done a lot of the other things and missed this most of all.
Anything you want to add?
Well, it's interesting because there are all the big festivities. I mean, 20 years ago this week, Dean was ordained in Kansas as bishop. This Wednesday, we'll have another big fun party, his institution as rector here. The glorious celebrations with Bishop Curry here and all 4 of the bishops of New York, I guess. Very fun celebrations, and those are certainly high moments, but
it's like having the planets all in alignment, to have 4 bishops of New York in one place.
And such a fun privilege to be able to travel the world. The House of Bishops meets twice a year, and the September meetings always include spouses. And during our time in Kansas, 3 or 4 of those meetings were outside of the U.S. There was one in Puerto Rico, because the Episcopal Church includes 15 other countries, I believe it is, and once in Quito, Ecuador, in Taiwan. So seeing the church in those places was interesting. Dean preached at the cathedral in Hong Kong, and I remember an evening in Hong Kong where the 7 or so bishops who were there with their spouses, they had rented a Chinese junk, and we sailed around Hong Kong harbor with all the lights. If any of you have ever been there, it's an amazing experience, eating Indian food on this old Chinese junk ship. It was just amazing. And I think, you know, when else in the world would I have had an opportunity to do something like that? But I think some of the highlights for me, the little things, are sort of watching Dean. He's shared with me, you know, over the years, different things when people will send a note. And when someone sends a note about something that he has done in their lives that made a huge difference, just being there in a particularly difficult situation, or a pastoral, you know, a low point in their life where he was just there in a pastoral way to hold a hand, cry with someone, say a prayer, and how that has touched people. Those are really powerful.
All right, I thought I was going to be able to fit 2 questions in, but I think we only have time for one more. We talk a lot about the struggles that the church is going through right now, whether that's at the local level or the larger level of the whole church. It's hard recovering from COVID. Church attendance is not where we want it to be, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you see hope and promise for the future of the church?
The Christian faith is a remarkable thing. It seems to do better under pressure. You know, martyrdom, persecution, these have all, instead of wiping out the church, they've actually fueled it. So the challenges that we face, I think, will strengthen the church over time. Maybe not this year, next year, but for the long haul. So I'm very optimistic. If it were a publicly traded company, I'd buy stock.
I agree. I agree, and I see it in faces looking around this room. You're all here on a Sunday morning. every week, most of you. It's pretty amazing. And I think of some of the younger leadership in the church that we've gotten to know, people who've kind of come up behind Dean, who are either he's mentored or been in some way connected to their ministry. I look at our staff, you, Peter, Zach, the enthusiasm of the younger people. Those of you who haven't met Bailey yet, meet Bailey. Just a lot of young folks who are plugging in and very gifted, and that gives me great hope for the future.
Dean, Ellen, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you all.
And thank you all for being here. Reminder that we are celebrating on Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Again, every bishop that's alive, it seems, is going to be here, so we hope you'll be here too, and to celebrate with us. Next week at the Forum, I'll be speaking about my time away, so if you're interested in hearing what I was up to and what it's like to come back, I hope you'll join us next week at 10 a.m.